Jackson Miller was not the kind of man who liked to be in the spotlight. He preferred the quiet, steady rhythm of life on his land, 75 acres of peaceful green space just outside a small town where things were slowly changing. While the town grew busier and new houses began to pop up around the edges, Jackson's property stayed the same, a piece of the past surrounded by the rushing future. He liked it that way. Jackson wasn't just any landowner. For decades, he had been a surveyor, a person who measured land carefully to help decide boundaries and property lines. His job was all about precision, about understanding every inch of land, every twist and turn of the borders that separated one person's property from another's. Over the years, he learned to read maps like they were books, and found joy in the details that most people overlooked. Every corner stake, every line in the dirt told a story to Jackson. He had inherited this land from his family, passed down through generations. It wasn't just a piece of property, it was a legacy. The Miller family had settled there long ago, farming and living quietly. Even though Jackson never farmed the land himself, he respected its history deeply. His parents had told stories about the trees, the small creek running through the fields, and the wildflowers that bloomed in spring. Jackson felt a responsibility to keep the land just as it was, a small piece of nature untouched by the noisy world beyond. As years went by, Jackson watched the town grow. Roads got wider, new shopping centers opened, and neighbors built new homes nearby. Big developers showed interest in his land too, often coming to his door with tempting offers. They promised him good money if he sold even a part of the land, suggesting the perfect places for new homes and communities. Many people in town saw it as a chance to grow, to build a modern neighborhood where children could play and families could live happily. But Jackson always said no. He wasn't against progress or change. He understood why the town needed to grow and why more houses were necessary. But Jackson had something different in mind. He wanted the land to remain natural, to protect the quiet space that had always been a sanctuary for him and his family. To Jackson, the land was like a trusted friend, something that deserved respect and care. He kept an eye on everything happening around him, walking his property regularly. Every few days, he would put on his worn boots, grab his old surveyor's tools, and walk the fields, measuring and remeasuring, making notes in his notebook. He checked fences, landmarks, and boundary markers to make sure everything was as it should be. He didn't trust others to handle this because he knew how easy it was to make mistakes, or worse, to take advantage of landowners who weren't careful. Jackson was careful, even a bit secretive about his land. Over the years, he had worked with his lawyer and local officials to make sure every boundary line was properly registered. He had updated his land documents quietly, ensuring all the legal paperwork was in perfect order. He had a sharp eye for detail and understood the importance of having solid proof of ownership. Life on the land was peaceful, but Jackson was not naive. He knew that once developers really set their sights on a place, things could change fast. Still, he trusted that if he stayed alert and kept control of the legal side, he could protect his land. He believed that knowledge was power. Jackson was also a man of simple pleasures. He enjoyed sitting on the porch of his small cabin that sat near the edge of the property, watching the sunset over the trees. He liked to listen to the birds sing early in the morning and to hear the rustling of leaves when the wind blew. He didn't need much else. For him, the land was enough. Even the neighbors respected Jackson. People saw him as steady and reliable, the kind of person who didn't rush into things but knew how to stand firm. Some tried to convince him to join community meetings or to speak out against the new developments, but Jackson preferred to stay quiet. He believed in action more than words, and he had his own way of protecting what mattered most. One day Jackson noticed something unusual. While walking near the far end of his property, he saw new fences that hadn't been there before. They were tall, straight, and looked like they were part of a new housing project. Curious, he walked closer and saw construction workers moving heavy machines, clearing land, and putting up foundations. To his shock, he realized these were homes. New houses being built right where he owned the land. At first, Jackson thought it was a mistake. Maybe the workers hadn't noticed the boundary lines, or the developers had bought some of his land without telling him. But when he checked the county records and compared them with his own maps, he found something alarming. The homes were being built partially on his property without his permission. Jackson felt a surge of anger and disbelief. How could this happen? How could people just build on his land without even asking? But he quickly pushed the emotions aside. He knew he had to act calmly and carefully. This was his land, his family's legacy, and he wouldn't let anyone take it away. He started taking photos and notes, documenting everything he saw. Jackson contacted his lawyer, explaining the situation in detail. They both knew this was not going to be easy. The developers and the homeowners association, called the HOA, were powerful, with lots of money and influence. But Jackson had something they didn't: years of preparation and careful legal work. Despite his quiet nature, Jackson was ready. He remembered all the work he had done to protect the land legally. He had quietly subdivided parts of his property. Years ago, registered boundaries clearly, and included clauses in the legal papers that prevented unauthorized construction or commercial use. These protections were not common knowledge, but they were strong. Jackson felt confident that the law was on his side. As the town's new homes grew closer and the construction noises filled the air, Jackson prepared for a fight. Not a loud or angry one, but a smart, legal battle. He wasn't just protecting a piece of land. He was protecting a way of life, the memories of generations, and a promise he had made to himself to keep the land safe. That quiet landowner, who once enjoyed simple days, walking fields and listening to the birds, was now at the center of a story that would change the town forever. If you want, I can continue with part 2 next, or help you with any other. After the peaceful years Jackson Miller had spent on his land, a sudden change disturbed the calm he had worked so hard to maintain. The town around him was growing fast, and more people wanted to live nearby. One day, Jackson noticed something. That didn't feel right. It started when he was out walking his usual path around the edge of his property. Normally, the trees and grass were undisturbed, the fences old but still standing where they should be. But now, there were tall wooden fences and large signs announcing a new housing development. Jackson's curiosity turned into concern as he saw heavy machines tearing up the earth, flattening the ground, and workers building what looked like the beginnings of new homes. Jackson took a closer look and realized that the new homes were being built right at the far corner of his land. At first, he thought the developers must have bought that part of his property from him. But when he checked the paperwork and county records carefully, something shocking became clear. The land where those homes were rising wasn't sold. The builders had started construction on Jackson's property without his permission. This was no simple mistake. The number of homes being built, 120 in total, showed how big this project was. It wasn't just a few houses on the wrong lot. It was a large community spilling onto his land. Jackson's heart sank. Years of care and hard work seemed to be at risk because of someone else's carelessness. Or worse, greed. Jackson was not a man to panic. He was used to problems, but this was serious. The Homeowners Association, HOA, connected with the development company, was behind this expansion. HOAs usually manage neighborhoods, taking care of shared spaces and setting rules for residents. But here, they were involved in building homes where they had no right to. Jackson knew this situation could get complicated. The HOA and developers had plenty of money and lawyers on their side. But Jackson wasn't just a landowner. He was a surveyor and knew the importance of legal boundaries. His property had clear, documented limits, and he had made sure everything was in order years ago. Despite the seriousness of the problem, Jackson didn't rush into confrontation. He walked the property carefully, taking pictures and writing down every detail. The fences that had suddenly appeared were far beyond where his land was supposed to end. The machines were clearing trees, pushing soil, and laying foundations that cut into his fields. Jackson could see bright orange markers placed along the boundary lines, markers that clearly did not match his own survey maps. This was more than a surveying error, as the developers would later claim. It was a huge oversight, or perhaps something more intentional. The construction was well underway, and many of the new homes were almost finished. Jackson contacted his lawyer immediately. They discussed the situation quietly but firmly. His lawyer reminded him that this was a fight, but one they were prepared for. Jackson had kept his land documents updated and legally strong, with protections that most landowners would not think to put in place. These protections included clauses that made building on his land without permission legally impossible. But before any official steps could be taken, Jackson wanted to understand how the HOA and developers had managed to start building on his property without noticing the boundaries. He dug deeper into the planning process. To his frustration, he found that the HOA had worked closely with the developer, but had failed to consult him, the landowner. Somehow the surveying reports used for planning were inaccurate, either from poor work or from ignoring the true property lines. Jackson began to realize that the HOA had rushed the project, hoping to push through construction without delays or objections. The mistake, or the decision, was costing Jackson dearly. His land was being taken, piece by piece, without respect for ownership or history. Word spread in the town as neighbors and future homeowners heard about the situation. Many of the new homeowners were shocked to learn their houses were built, partly on land they didn't own. Some were worried about what this meant for their homes. Would they be forced to move? Could their property rights be challenged? Jackson felt the weight of responsibility, not only to his land, but also to the people who had already bought these homes. They were caught in the middle of a legal battle they hadn't asked for. Despite the frustration, Jackson remained calm. His goal was not to cause chaos, but to set things right. He continued to gather evidence. Each day he walked the land, snapping pictures of the new houses that crept closer and closer to the center of his property. He recorded notes about the construction, dates when machinery arrived, and any conversations with workers or HOA representatives. Jackson understood that in court, proof would be everything. Behind the scenes, Jackson's lawyer drafted a cease and desist letter, a formal warning to stop building immediately on Jackson's land. The HOA received the letter, but their response was defensive. They blamed a surveying error and said the boundaries had been misunderstood. The developers promised to investigate and fix the mistake, but Jackson knew that fixing this was not simple. The situation became tense. The HOA wanted to keep the project moving, while Jackson stood firm on his rights. For Jackson, this wasn't just about money. It was about respect, about property rights, and about the law. Some town officials tried to mediate, but Jackson stayed focused on the facts. He knew that compromise was only possible if his land was fully respected. The dispute was now not just a private matter, but a community issue. The homes on his property affected many lives, and the story was quickly becoming the talk of the town. Jackson's patience and preparation gave him an advantage. Years before, he had carefully subdivided his land, registering legal boundaries and protections with the county. This paperwork was now a shield against the careless or greedy actions of the HOA and developers. Jackson had planned for the unexpected, even if he hadn't hoped it would come to this. As the days passed, Jackson's quiet resistance grew stronger. He wasn't someone who shouted or protested loudly in public, but he had allies: his lawyer, the county officials who respected his records, and neighbors who supported his fight to keep the land safe. In the evenings, Jackson sat on his porch, watching the sun set behind the trees. The sounds of construction machines had not stopped, But Jackson's mind was clear. He knew the law was on his side, and he was ready to defend what was rightfully his. The developers, sensing the growing legal threat, began to talk about settlements. They offered money and promised to correct the boundaries if Jackson's would drop the lawsuit. But Jackson was cautious. He wasn't interested in a quick deal. He wanted to make sure that his land was fully protected and that no future projects would infringe on his property again. The Homeowners Association found itself in trouble. The mistake had become a scandal, and they faced pressure from angry residents who demanded answers. Many wondered how such a big error could have been made without proper checks. The HOA's reputation suffered as the story unfolded. Jackson's stand was becoming more than a legal fight. It was a lesson for the entire town. People began to realize how important it was to understand land rights and boundaries. They saw how a single mistake could disrupt lives and cause conflict. Jackson's quiet land was no longer just a piece of green space. It had become a symbol of justice and careful stewardship. Despite the stress and challenges, Jackson never lost his calm. He believed that truth and preparation would win in the end. His story was just beginning, but one thing was clear. He would not let the HOA or developers take what was his without a fight. The next steps would be harder: court battles, negotiations, and public hearings. But Jackson was ready. He knew the land, he knew the law, and he was determined to protect both. After the shocking discovery that the Homeowners Association and the developers had built over 120 houses on his land without permission, Jackson Miller knew he was facing a big challenge. But he also knew he was prepared. Years before, Jackson had quietly taken steps that most people would never think to take. He had set a legal trap, and now it was time to use it. Jackson wasn't just an ordinary landowner. He was a former surveyor with deep knowledge of land laws and boundaries. This gave him a big advantage in the fight ahead. While many landowners might panic or give up when faced with such a problem, Jackson's careful planning and calm attitude helped him stay focused. Years earlier, Jackson had subdivided parts of his property in a way that was smart and protective. Subdividing means dividing land into smaller pieces for legal purposes, and Jackson had done this to keep clear control over every part of his property. He had registered these subdivisions with the county, making sure everything was recorded legally and officially. But Jackson hadn't stopped there. He had included special clauses in the land registration, legal terms that prevented anyone from building on his land without explicit permission. These clauses made it clear that unauthorized construction would be illegal and could be stopped by law. This was the key to his legal trap. When the new homes were built on his property, the HOA and developers didn't realize that these clauses existed. They thought they had the right to build because they assumed the land was theirs, or because they relied on incorrect surveys. But Jackson's paperwork said otherwise. After consulting with his lawyer, Jackson decided to take strong action. They sent a formal letter to the HOA and the developers, a cease and desist order, demanding that all construction on his land stop immediately. This was an official legal warning that work must stop or face serious consequences. The HOA was surprised by this. They had thought the situation would be a simple misunderstanding, something that could be fixed quickly. But Jackson's legal team was ready. The letter also stated that Jackson planned to sue for trespassing and damages if the construction continued. This was a serious move, and the HOA had to take it seriously. Jackson and his lawyer began preparing a lawsuit. A lawsuit is a legal case that asks a court to decide on a dispute. In this case, Jackson was asking the court to recognize that the homes were built illegally on his land and to order the HOA and developers to pay for damages and stop using his property. Jackson's lawyer explained that the case would be complex, involving property law, surveying records, and contracts. But Jackson was ready to provide all the evidence. He had photos, maps, land records, and detailed notes documenting every step of the construction and how it crossed his boundaries. One important part of the legal case was Jackson's subdivision records. Because he had properly divided and registered his land, the court could clearly see what parts belonged to him. This wasn't just about who built houses. It was about property rights that were clearly and legally defined. Jackson also showed that the HOA had ignored his rights. They didn't communicate with him before starting construction, and they relied on inaccurate surveys that did not match his official land records. This was a failure on their part. The developers, for their part, tried to defend their actions. They claimed the error was accidental and blamed poor surveying work. They said they had acted in good faith, thinking they were building on the right land. But Jackson's lawyer argued that good faith didn't matter when they failed to check the official records properly. The law required them to verify land boundaries before building, and they hadn't done that. The lawsuit also sought compensation, money for the damage done to Jackson's land and for the unauthorized use of his property. The construction had damaged the soil, cut down trees, and changed the natural landscape. Jackson wanted the HOA and developers to pay for these damages. Jackson's story attracted attention beyond just the parties involved. Local newspapers began to cover the case, and many people in the town were curious about the legal battle. Some homeowners who had bought the new houses felt worried, unsure if their homes would be affected. Despite the growing public interest, Jackson stayed focused. He didn't want to create fear or panic. He wanted justice. He hoped the court would recognize the rights of landowners like him and send a message that land must be respected. As the lawsuit moved forward, there were discussions about settlements. The developers and HOA tried to negotiate with Jackson's team. They offered money and solutions, hoping to avoid a long court fight. But Jackson was cautious. He wanted to make sure any settlement truly protected his land and rights. He was not interested in a quick deal that would allow similar problems to happen again. The legal trap Jackson had prepared was working. The HOA and developers were now forced to face the consequences of their mistake, or their negligence. Jackson's confidence came not only from his legal protections, but also from his personal integrity. He wasn't fighting out of anger or revenge, but because he believed in fairness and respect for the law. His actions showed that careful planning and knowledge could protect even a quiet landowner against powerful interests. While the legal process could be slow and stressful, Jackson had the patience and determination to see it through. He continued to visit his land, now marked by construction signs and new homes, reminding him why he fought. Jackson's story became a lesson for the town. It showed that even in the face of rapid development, landowners must be vigilant. It reminded the community that progress should not come at the cost of rights and respect. As the case proceeded, the court began reviewing all the evidence. Experts in surveying and property law were called to testify. Jackson's careful records and legal clauses stood out. The HOA's mistakes and the developer's failures became clear. The judge listened to both sides but seemed impressed by Jackson's preparation and calm approach. The legal trap Jackson had built was working exactly as planned. While the outcome was still to be decided, Jackson knew he had done everything possible. His land was more than just soil and trees. It was a symbol of respect, patience, and justice. He was ready for the next chapter in this fight, the moment when the law would finally speak, and the HOA and developers would have to answer for their actions. Jackson Miller, the quiet landowner, with a careful mind and strong heart, was proving that sometimes the best defense is a well-prepared plan and the courage to stand firm. After months of preparing and fighting, Jackson Miller's legal battle with the Homeowners Association and the developers reached a critical moment. The court hearings had begun, and Jackson was ready to face whatever came next. Jackson's quiet life had changed dramatically. Instead of peaceful days on his land, he spent hours working with his lawyer, reviewing documents, and attending court sessions. The case had attracted attention not just from the town but from the media and even legal experts. Everyone wanted to see how this unusual story of a single landowner versus a powerful HOA would end. Jackson felt a mix of emotions: determination, anxiety, but mostly confidence. He knew the law was on his side, and he was prepared with solid evidence. But the courtroom was a different place from the quiet fields he loved. Here, he had to be patient and focused. The first days of the trial were about presenting the facts. Jackson's lawyer carefully explained how the HOA and developers had built 120 homes on land that clearly belonged to Jackson. They showed official maps, survey reports, and the legal documents that Jackson had prepared years ago. The judge and jury could see how the land was divided and how the construction crossed boundaries. The HOA and developers tried to defend themselves by repeating their earlier claims that the mistake was accidental. They said they relied on a survey that they believed was correct. They argued that no harm was intended and that they had acted in good faith, but Jackson's team had prepared for this. They pointed out that the law requires developers and HOAs to double-check land records before building. Ignorance was not an excuse, especially for such a large project. They also showed that the HOA had not communicated with Jackson at all, which was a serious breach of protocol. During the trial, experts in land surveying testified. They explained in simple terms how the boundaries were measured and why the HOA's survey was wrong. Their testimony supported Jackson's claim that the homes had been built illegally on his property. Jackson himself was called to testify. Despite being nervous, he spoke clearly about his land, its history, and the steps he had taken to protect it. He described the moment he discovered the construction and how he felt watching his land being taken without permission. His honest and calm words made an impact. The trial was not just about land boundaries, it was about respect for property rights. Jackson's case highlighted how important it was for developers and communities to follow the rules. It showed the dangers of rushing projects without proper checks. As the trial went on, the court also heard from homeowners who had bought houses in the new development. Many were confused and worried. Some did not know their homes were partly on land they did not own. They shared their feelings of uncertainty and fear about the future. Jackson understood their concerns. He did not want anyone to lose their homes. This was a difficult part of the case because it involved real people's lives, not just legal arguments. Despite the pressure, Jackson remained calm and respectful. He wanted to find a fair solution that would protect his land, but also consider the homeowners. After all the evidence was presented, the trial moved into negotiations. The HOA and developers, facing strong legal arguments and public pressure, were ready to talk. Jackson and his lawyers set clear conditions. First, the construction on his land must stop immediately. Second, the HOA and developers needed to compensate him for the damages, the lost trees, soil disruption, and the loss of use of his land. Third, any future development plans had to be approved by Jackson before proceeding. The negotiations were tense and took weeks. The HOA wanted to avoid admitting full responsibility, but Jackson's firm position made it clear that he was serious. Finally, an agreement was reached. The HOA and developers agreed to pay Jackson a large settlement to cover damages and legal costs. They promised to respect the property boundaries in the future and to consult with Jackson on any new plans. The settlement also included a public apology from the HOA, admitting their mistake and committing to better practices. This was important to Jackson, who wanted to make sure that others would learn from the situation. For the homeowners already living in the new houses, the agreement included protections. They were guaranteed that their homes would remain theirs, and that the boundary issues would be resolved without forcing anyone to move. Jackson felt a deep sense of relief. The fight was not easy, but he had won more than just a legal case. He had defended his family's legacy and sent a strong message about respect for landowners. After the settlement, Jackson returned to his quiet life on the land, but he was changed. He had seen how powerful groups could try to push aside individual rights, but he had also seen how careful preparation and courage could win the day. Jackson became a local hero, known for standing up to the HOA and developers. He was invited to speak at community meetings and even helped other landowners understand their rights. The story of the 120 homes built on Jackson's land became a lesson in the town about the importance of boundaries, legal knowledge, and standing firm. Jackson's peaceful land was safe again, but the experience taught him and the town that vigilance was necessary. Growth and progress must always respect the past and the rights of those who protect it. Jackson never stopped loving his land. He continued to walk its fields, listen to the birds, and watch the sunsets. But now his steps were stronger, knowing he had fought for what was right and won. After the long legal battle and the settlement, Jackson Miller's life slowly began to return to normal, but nothing was quite the same anymore. The experience of fighting a powerful homeowners association and developers had changed him deeply, and it had changed the community around him as well. Jackson's land, which had once been quietly peaceful, now carried the marks of history, a history shaped by courage, justice, and respect for property rights. The legal fight was over, but the lessons it taught were just beginning to spread. Jackson spent many days walking through his fields, reflecting on everything that had happened. He remembered how it had started with the surprise of seeing heavy machinery and homes built on his property without permission. He recalled the shock, the anger, and the determination that followed. But as time passed, Jackson realized that the most important part of this story wasn't the fight itself. It was what came after: the healing, the rebuilding of trust, and the new understanding among neighbors, developers, and landowners. The settlement agreement had brought financial compensation to Jackson, but for him, the real victory was the promise that the HOA and developers would change their ways. They agreed to better practices to avoid similar mistakes in the future. This included clear communication with landowners, double-checking surveys, and respecting boundaries strictly. The HOA held meetings with residents and landowners to explain the changes. They introduced new rules that required transparency and cooperation. Jackson was invited to speak at these meetings, where he shared his story and urged the community to learn from the experience. Many people in the town were grateful to Jackson for standing up. They saw that property rights are not just about land. They are about respect, fairness, and trust. Jackson's quiet courage had brought the town closer, creating a stronger sense of community. Jackson also helped other landowners who were worried about their own properties. He offered advice and guidance, helping them understand the importance of clear boundaries and legal protections. His knowledge became a resource for many. The experience taught Jackson that knowledge is power. By understanding the law and preparing carefully, even a single person could stand up against powerful groups and win. This message inspired many others. Meanwhile, the homeowners who had bought the new houses were reassured. They learned that their homes were safe and that the boundary issues had been resolved fairly. Jackson made sure that no one was forced to lose their home, which helped ease tensions and build goodwill. The town itself began to grow in a more thoughtful way. Developers and HOAs took new steps to involve landowners early in planning, making sure mistakes like this would not happen again. The story of Jackson's fight became a case study in local planning meetings and even in nearby communities. Jackson's relationship with the land grew stronger. After the conflict, he planted new trees to replace those lost during construction and worked on improving the soil. He wanted to heal the land that had suffered, just as the community was healing from the dispute. Jackson's family, who had supported him throughout the fight, celebrated the victory quietly. They knew the battle had been hard, but they were proud of Jackson's strength and fairness. In his later years, Jackson found joy in teaching others about land care, property rights, and the importance of standing up for what is right. His story became more than just a personal victory. It became a lesson for future generations. Looking back, Jackson realized that while the fight had been difficult, it was worth every moment. He had protected not just his land, but the principles of justice and respect. His story was a reminder that careful planning, courage, and patience could overcome even the biggest challenges. The community around Jackson grew stronger because of the experience. People learned that progress should respect history, that growth must honor boundaries, and that everyone, no matter how small their voice, deserves to be heard. Jackson's land remained a symbol of these values. It was no longer just a place of trees and fields, but a place where justice had been defended, where rights had been honored, and where a single man's quiet strength had made a difference. And so, Jackson Miller's story ended, not with bitterness or defeat, but with hope and new beginnings, a legacy of respect for land, law, and community that would live on for years to come.